Good day to all of you. Thank you for being present and participating in today's discussion. Today, the topic is very, very important. It is on National Asset Monetization Pipeline that Government of India recently announced. The reports have been issued by the Niti Aayog. So today the main presenter will be Dr. Manas Bhattacharya, and his exact topic will be monetization of public asset, allaying economist fear. He has from the document from these two, part one and part two, collected all the facts to say that many of the apprehensions and the fears may not be practical enough, and he has tried to say what government is trying to defend and government is trying to say and why it is necessary. It is very true that government's financial status is in a difficult condition due to COVID, and there is a limit to increasing the fuel prices, and but government needs for its welfare programs and for its capital programs more and more assets, and the present GDP data has, although because of the 24.4% decline in April-June 2020, the 21-22 figure gives us a 20.1% hike, and in all respects, if we compare April-June 21 with April-June 20, things are better, 18, 19, 20% increase. But in case of government expenditure, there is a decline of 4.8%. That also points towards difficult situation. So that difficulty and the need to really take advantage of those assets which are they call it brownfield projects, which are not generating results or income, to uh, uh, kind of loaning it, kind of leasing it, not selling it. Government is telling again and again not selling it. So what kind of situation that gives us? So now I would request Manas to give the presentation. But before that, I give a prelude to how we started. This is the third session. We are all from the 1980 batch of Indian Economic Service, a Group A service of the Government of India, and we were all involved in economic policy making and implementation and monitoring. With this, for over 4 decades of working in the government and elsewhere on economic matters, we felt that it would be good to give to our posterity whatever we feel, especially the youngsters. So that is the idea. Rather, of course, it will help us to keep us up to date, but more than that, somehow share our experiences with the youngsters and the people, and to tell on the basis of facts and figures uh, what are the basic issues involved in terms of economic policy making, different issues at different times. With these words, I would request Dr. Manas Bhattacharya to kindly give his presentation. Dr. Manas Bhattacharya has, like all of us, has over 4 decades of developmental experience, and he has, apart from working in the Government of India, he has a very substantial experience in international level organization. His last posting in ILO was in Dhaka, Bangladesh. So with these words, I would request Dr. Manas Bhattacharya to kindly speak.
Thanks, Nimol. In fact, your voice cut in between. So my fear that as we speak, the interruptions in between, and we'll try to do as much as possible. I mean, given the situation. Now, I'm very glad with my friends and batchmates, and thanks Nimol, Rajiv, Velu has also joined now. One reason why this topic was because IES recently has started uploading a lot of materials on these, and from there only. And I thought maybe we can just extend that kind of a discussion and concern amongst us in a more focused manner. And as we recall that, Commissioner has just said, I mean, the way he actually briefed the Finance Secretary on expenditure secretary on, fiscal matters, etc. So I thought was to particularly focus in this that young IES officers who are now working with government can really apply themselves to this context and come out with meaningful policy recommendations to the government or useful inputs for the government to go ahead with this monetization plan. Because monetization plan has been already announced in the budget, and people are really discussing proposals, the for and against the proposals, but now there is no going back. In fact, this is going to happen. And broadly, I'll just touch upon what have mentioned, I mean, express their concerns about, and what my thinking about those concerns and how do I respond to that. And then in course of this kind of a deliberation, I try to distill which are the areas where young economists can now, I mean, not young economists, any economists for that matter, but right now we are really thinking about the young IES officers, how they can really enrich the government's function in this perspective. Now we have all heard that that Union Budget 2021 and 22 had announced and not only that, with the help of Niti Aayog, they have advanced a bit, and they're now the concept popularized is asset monetization. Now, asset monetization can mean many of the things, and asset monetization is in this particular perspective is not something very new. It has happened in India, it has happened in other countries, and there are lessons available. Interesting fact about asset monetization is basically trying to monetize some of the selected brownfield projects, basically to rejuvenate them, to ensure additional private investment there, and gaining efficiency of implementation, operation, and maintenance when private sector is running it, and government and private both are really regulating the whole scenario. Now, they have mentioned that there's about 6 lakh crores of asset is expected from this monetization, and this generally conveys very wrong impression to those economists who are superficially looking at it, as if government is leasing to a way to lease their house property, and they will get 6 crores out of that lease. It's nothing like that. As I proceed, we'll all see that this is not that straightforward or simple, and any criticism which is born out of that kind of a leasing versus renting concept may not be adequately focused, adequately analyzed. Now, this is National Investment Pipeline program, which is already it's called National Monetization Pipeline, which is already in operation, and this particular asset monetization program is synchronized with that and is also co-terminus with that. And as you mentioned that there have been Niti Aayog has already come out with 2 useful reports for us to read, and I think many of us have gone through that. And as Nimon, as you mentioned, that this is this fiscal appetite and all that, which is also important, definitely important if some money comes from private sector. But we did not think that that is the main guiding force, because there are, even if there is there is no immediate fiscal imperatives, it makes sense really to explore these kinds of concepts and gain much more experience and then operational efficiency by the government and private sector combined through public-private partnership. And as you know, it's about 12 12 ministries, the infrastructure line ministries and departments are roads, and transport and highways, railways, power, pipeline, civil aviation, shipping ports and waterways, telecommunication, food and public distribution, mining, coal and housing, and others. Now, NFT is aimed at private sector invest for new high quality affordable infrastructure. And spillover benefit growth and employment through multiplier and seamless integration of rural, urban, and semi-urban areas. Now, these are all about brownfield projects, as Rimon has rightly said. And brownfield project, the advantage is these projects are already there in operation. Maybe more will be added to that, more infrastructure assets will be added to that. But there is certainty about the revenue stream out of that to some extent. So private sector can really calculate their the profile of upstream revenue. Greenfield, I mean, some of the difficulties associated with the greenfield project, like if you have a land about which litigation continues and you are not able to free that, so that you cannot invest. But still, what I find that in this book, it is written that state government is incentivized also to really step up, use this channel to step up investment in the greenfield projects. And Niti Aayog has clarified that the modalities of the NMP will be structured contractual relationship as against privatization or slump sale of assets. They have made it very clear. It is basically partnership it is basically public and private partnership in different ways, and it is not really outright sale. And also Niti Aayog has clearly maintained that it is monetization will be of core assets and not the non-core assets like land and building, which are not part of the core activities. Wherever land and buildings are parts of the core activities, then definitely they will be included. But otherwise, some government building is situated in a particular huge land, so it automatically goes to private sector. It's not like that. So they're cautioning that. Now, these are broad statements which I am making, and these broad statements are there in the volumes of volume 1 and 2 of Niti Aayog. And there, in fact, we'll later on see that how our economists, and particularly IES officers, can go deep into that and can fine-tune these concepts properly. So there are three broad features. One is monetization of rights, not ownership. Assets are handed back at the end of the transaction life. Number 2 feature is that it is brownfield, de-risked assets, stable revenue streams. De-risked assets in the sense that, of course, because it's already generating some revenue and showing operation. So to that extent, the risk is less. But for an economy, any risk, which is any revenue upstream for which we are making projection, there are possible risks, and risk mitigation strategies have to be there. I mean, that will be there. So de-risked assets, which the volume 2 is mentioning, is not completely de-risked. Currently, it is de-risked in the sense that many of these are already in operation. So there is uncertainties actually are not there to the extent it is there if it starts from the scratch. Then the third point is that it is structured partnerships under defined contractual frameworks with strict KPIs and performance standards. An empowered core group of secretaries on asset monetization under the chairmanship of Cabinet Secretary has been constituted for the overall implementation and monitoring of the asset monetization program. The period of NMP has been decided so as to be co-terminus, as I have mentioned, with the balance period under NIP, that is 4 more years from now, and the aggregate asset pipeline under NMP over the 4-year period is financial year 2022 to 2025, indicatively valued at 6 lakh crores, and it is at approximately 14% of the proposed outlay for center under National Infrastructure Pipeline, which is 43 lakh crores. The AMP involves more than 12 line ministries and more than 20 asset classes. And the sectors included, as I have already mentioned, that roads, ports, airports, railways, water, warehousing, gas and product pipeline, power generation and transmission, mining, telecom, stadium, hospitality and housing. The top 5 sectors in this, as per the estimated expected value of monetization, includes roads, that is 27%, then followed by railways, which is 25%, power is 15%, oil and gas pipeline 8%, and telecom 6%. So these 5 actually is about 83% of the total monetization. If you can look at this, and then you'll find all of them, there have been some experiments with the PPP. In terms of annual phasing by value, it's 15% of the assets with an indicative value of about 0.88 lakh crores that is envisaged to be rolled out in the current financial year 2021 and 22. How far this is practical is an important question, and Ramesh can definitely educate us on that. Now, what is the concern of the economists? One definitely said that why leasing? Just sell it, because if it is leased, then it will the private sector will have no ownership and will not be interested in maintenance. I'm not quite comfortable with this discomfort of the critic, because it is clearly stated that asset monetization is not only a funding mechanism, but it involves infrastructure operations, augmentation and maintenance by the private partner. Poorly maintained assets will not generate user satisfaction and therefore likely to adversely affect the revenue stream. So if I am a private investor, if I don't really maintain the leased assets properly, I cannot expect revenue also to that extent, because consumers will not like it. And that apart, because there is a monitoring mechanism in place, at least in writing. So in the accountability framework, the performance of NMP will be monitored on a real-time basis. The union budget has provided for real-time monitoring of performance through the asset monetization dashboard. What is essential, in my view, here is to ensure that these KPIs, when they are designed, should also reflect maintenance aspects of the physical assets. Definitely, we can welcome IES officers, young IES officers, to examine what kind of KPIs can reflect good maintenance. It's not very easy. I mean, asset-wise and context-wise, it will vary. Also, what are the international experience and things like that? They can pull together all these and can come out with a set of KPIs in addition to what government will see, and then can discuss that these are the KPIs which will ensure and address economic concern. So this can be a substantial contribution of IAS officers. Then there is another concern. They say is monetization value and underestimate. People say that it can actually lead to higher money, but government is taking less. Or it can give less money and government is expecting more. And this is not, I'm not saying in this context, but these kind of things very often happen in auction. Any auction, sometimes, I mean, telecom auction is of course one example. Globally, I mean, sometimes private players, they bid very high, and then they just capture the asset and they don't function. They don't even pay money to the government. This has happened globally. It is recorded now. These kinds of things in developed countries. Or if the bidders actually join hands and say, we'll not bid so much, we'll bid less. This happens in agricultural mandios. The so-called bidders, so-called middleman versus the growers, and they don't allow the price to rise to its optimal value. So these fears are there expressed by the economist. Now, to this concern, I must say that although there are examples in bidding, but these 6 lakhs crores is only indicative, very broadly indicative. As we go down the paper, we'll see that there are heterogeneous mixture of types of investment. Is sometimes it is contractual, sometimes it is book value, sometimes it is market value, sometimes it is they call it capex expenditure. So there are various types of things. So this 6 lakh crores is an addition of that, and sometimes the private investment has been valued. Sometimes some assets have been costed at some or other with kind of imputed value, and they have been added. So these additions are the heterogeneous mixture of these kinds of assets and expectations. So to really dissect them and go deep into that, IES officers may have to look at it. I mean, like 6 lakhs crores is a very, it's a thumb rule, very high level estimation. It's not really getting into each and every component specificities and not really trying to dig deep into what really if this asset can bring value. This is there to some extent done in the volume 2 towards the end. There is a table for each particular project. They have written some value and which they expect to accrue, and they have said how this has been arrived at, but not in greater detail so that people can really question them. And also the underlying assumptions are not, they are very broadly mentioned. So like some of the based on various approaches such as market or cost or book or enterprise value, etc., as applicable and available for respective sectors. The actual realization will depend on the timing of transactions, then financial structuring of the deal, investor interest, all of this. So it can be definitely wide away from this 6 lakh crore. It can be more or less. So, but there is no need for fear. What can happen is basically, I mean, government can definitely say that this is my reserve price. This in any case, government is getting, and government cannot accept anything. This my asset marketization if the value of leasing it to the private sector and consequent revenue expectation is something which is even lower than what government is earning now. So opportunity cost of this kind of a decision, government can always see and accordingly take decide. And IES officers can definitely pick up each and every element and try to make estimate and assessment under different assumptions and say that look, I mean, if the private sector doesn't pay more than this, then please don't sell. Don't lease it. Let it be with the government. So that the value for money consideration is respected. And I have proposed that basically because Niti Aayog has given something, not bad, but they have not given enough details for economists to really form opinion. So basically, once the detailed data, the model, and the assumptions are uploaded on the website by Niti Aayog, then definitely different economics can come out with their skepticism and they can contribute their inputs. And they can also have some notion of reserve pricing. So, so that things are not overpriced. Overpriced bidding is also extremely dangerous. I mean, because after that, there can be captured by the private sector and there will standstill. Then now the bankruptcy legislation is there and all of these things are there. The government has already indicated how different instruments such as public-private partnership, concessions, and capital market instruments, such as infrastructure investment trust, will be deployed by the government under the NMP. According to the government, the choice of instrument is guided by the sector-specific considerations, the nature of asset, timing of transactions, including market consideration, target investor profile, and the level of operation investment control envisaged to be retained by the asset owners, etc. the monetization value may either be in the form of upfront accruals or revenue share or by way of private sector investment. Any economist wanting to be reassured of the value for money considerations can do independent analysis taking all these factors into account. So I would suggest the IES officers can definitely pick up in their respective sectors the project, and even for one or two projects they can show how the method should run. Then there is another concern that can private sector partners for monopoly or duopoly. So suppose one or two big businesses really they allow the market to be influenced, and so competition is always good. And if competition is not there and the bidders or the private investors form monopoly, then definitely monopoly price is higher than competitive price in theory, in economic theory. But in practice, this is very likely that the kind of investors, I mean the expression of interest, the kind of technical exposure, technical proposal plus financial proposal, financial strength, etc., will be such that they will these types of private sector organization, be it global or national, they will have some monopoly power. There is no doubt about it because they are few in number. Even today, you don't really have very competitive private sector. I mean, some always dominate. That is natural. And number two is that many of these infrastructure projects, as we know from basics of public economics, they are natural monopolies. So I mean, they have to operate as a natural monopoly. I mean, they cannot be fragmented beyond a point. It can be. I mean, they call unbundling in infrastructure, but not to an extent. And there can be monopoly or duopoly influences can destroy the market in such cases. But the issue is we have to compare basically what happens if there is a government monopoly vis-a-vis what is a private monopoly. If private monopoly results in better consumer welfare, enhanced consumer satisfaction and welfare, then definitely that is a welcome development. I mean, I would suggest that we should not have any resentment about that. That because private sector is monopoly, so it not. Number two is there has to be reasonable pricing. And if private sector artificially, because of their monopoly power, jacks up the price beyond the ability to pay by people, that was the classic public sector argument, then regulation has to play its play. And there has been enough of discussion on regulatory mechanisms in these kinds of monetization program. And the government is on board stating that infrastructure assets entail a clear need for the government. This is quoted from volume 2 of Niti Aayog's reports. Entail a clear need for the government to retain a degree of oversight and control by way of either contractual mechanisms or regulation. So the regulations concepts have already been discussed. This is because the projects around these assets typically involve transfer of public assets, including land, delegation of governmental authority to collect and appropriate user charges that are levied by force of law and must therefore be reasonable. So the monopoly influence on prices have been already taken care of in these kinds of concern by the government. Protection of users' interest and the need to secure value for public money. Provision of services to users in a monopoly or semi-monopoly situation. So government itself is admitting that there is a need. There is a need to control this, which imposes a special obligation on the government to ensure adequate service quality. I mean, so that the monopoly and semi-mono or semi-monopoly influences do not really jeopardize the quality of the services or result in very high prices. Uh, so private monopoly is not always bad. I mean, it can result in enhanced consumer welfare. Now there is enough debate about employment consequences. I mean, definitely private sector will not employ people if they're not enough productive, and there can be exploitative margin, no doubt about it. My experience in government shows that even if government wants to regulate the employment thing, employment that the private sector will ensure that this many people continue to remain employed. Private sector has 1,001 ways of manipulating that, and eventually, what private sector will do, will try to have capital intensive technology, and will try to run it through as less number of people as possible. But having said this, there will be many multiplier effect generated, many new economic activities. So there will be new avenues of employment created. What government can do is what is called active labor market policy, like trying to understand who is becoming unemployed, retraining them to be employed in new activities being generated. This active labor market policy can come in force. Then there is a concern about capture by the private sector. This is a very important concept, captured by the private sector. It happened in telecoms. Like, there are bidders of spectrum in telecom, and one of the bidders is bidding very high and getting the spectrum, and they are sitting over it. They are not allowing because others are already priced out. This fellow is only sitting over it and not allowing that competitive game over spectrum to operate and play. This is called capture. I mean, there are different ways of capturing by the private sector, and definitely in that case, our economic service officers should find out in whatever different ways capture can happen in these projects, and what are the safeguards that can be used to prevent or minimize this kind of possibilities. And if capture happens, then what happens is it has to go to court or dispute resolution. And then the only option out is basically for the government to begin with, arrange for right kind of arbitration, and to see that if eventually dispute resolution mechanism works expeditiously, quickly this asset, if the private sector is ousted, then if the government can take over this whole thing, and how they can immediately reactivate the whole thing, rather than allowing the burial of the whole thing because of mistaken decisions in the past. There is a very imaginative kind of concern expressed by private sector that's called bankruptcy declared by the private sector. That means, I mean, it is there in the video. And bankruptcy declared means the private sector already gets it, and they take money from commercial bank, and then they are not able to pay government whatever the government's expectation is, and the government goes, and then bankruptcy is a legislation law which comes in to protect them, and they say that, well, I am bankrupt because of this reason, so there will be standstill, that you cannot really claim the whole thing from me. So this is a dangerous thing. There are reasons why in advanced countries bankruptcy legislation were enforced for a long time, and during the financial crisis this became very important. But in India, if this is misused, then there is a problem. Also, government has said that they will see to it that those who are bidding, their exposure to commercial bank funding or development institution funding is quite controlled, so that if they take away the money, the financial institutions are not doomed, and then the assets also do not perform. This kind of situation has to be preempted in whatever way possible through regulation, and I mean they should not be allowed to leverage, and that the financial structuring and financial supervision and control, the government has to really, through either through SEBI or through other regulatory body, has to really come out with a blueprint of how they're going to regulate against these kinds of capture and these kinds of bankruptcy, taking recourse to bankruptcy. Now, India has already traversed some distance in PPP in infrastructure. There are also lessons which can be and are being distilled from asset monetization in other countries such as Australia, Brazil, China, Indonesia, Japan, Mexico, Uruguay, the UK, the USA. Now, our IES officers can really prepare some kind of a compilation of the lessons which have been learned from these countries, which are relevant to India and these projects, and come out with report, come out with article, come out with publication, come out with report, and that will be highly valued by secretaries. Like Ramesh's note has been developed by Mr. Sharma. Mr. Sharma, I knew, is an excellent, one of the excellent outstanding officers. And use of financial, and now the concern is that what if, I mean, this 6 lakhs crores or whatever lakhs crores, this is not the money which is coming to government hands. No way, because there are the way this summation or aggregation happens. There are different components. So only some part of this money actually is coming in the hands of the government as liquid money which government can invest. Now, how government will spend it? The volume 2 report is a bit ambivalent about this. Sometimes it says it will be only reinvested in the infrastructure. Sometimes it says government can also use it for some other purposes. Now, I think a preferred option will be the infrastructure. Money should go to infrastructure, either these projects or some other projects. Because otherwise, we know that when the government spends money, sometimes there is leakage from that kind of, and money earned through this kind of due diligence should not go like that. Then, you know, if you take into consideration all these projects, you will find that bulk of the projects are still remaining with the government. In asset monetization program, only a very insignificant portion of the, if you see that 5% of the, only 400 out of 8,000 railway station and things like that, and even in the roadways, I mean, very insignificant percentage is actually being monetized. So I would rather welcome that this should be a good, fertile ground for exploring, doing the researching, and coming out with how to make best out of this kind of scenarios. My only fear is that this time frame which has been given there, if government is in a haste, in a hurry to immediately do something, they will really not be doing justice to proper economic analysis and proper, optimal outcome of to ensure that optimal outcome is feasible out of that. Anything done in a distressed mindset is, at least in these kinds of cases, is going to be self-defeating in nature. So, Nirmal and my friends, with this, I'll say it's over for me for the time being, and then we can now discuss and have inputs from our friends, and which will be very useful because they know how it happened in the past.
Thank you very much, Manas, for your very comprehensive presentation and the merit of the scheme. And you are very correct that even if we would not have undergone this financial crisis and fiscal problem, there is enough merit to use these assets productively and make them running and earn revenue. So, and you also have highlighted that there are experiences outside India which guide us, and there is experience of US or Finland, or and of course UK experience. British Rail is very interesting, where there is talk about after nationalization giving it back and again renationalization. So that also need to be borne in mind. Two, three things we need to bear in mind. Maybe Velu and Ramesh, who will speak and give their thoughts, may like to touch upon these areas. What is the actual worth of these assets? So whether there is a possibility of underpricing or not giving the government its due, and also the issue of capture that Manas has mentioned, and what Kausik Basu has said, asset stripping. Since ownership will be still with the government, many of these private parties may not take interest, and there may be a Russian kind of situation where oligarchs take over. What happened at the time of Boris Yeltsin in 1990s. So that is an issue that uh, needs to be thought over. And one thing also Manas also mentioned about it, this asset monetization may take two forms. It may either be in the process of upfront accruals or by way of private sector investment. If it is investment, so that means all these payments will get nullified. So pricing of that will raise the issue. So the government is very, very particular. That's why our finance minister mentioned during the press conference so many times that this is not sale, this is lease. Government will continue to be the owner. So that needs to be borne in mind. Other area is that what Kausik Basu has said, it is a good idea but a wrong way to go. So he is basically having objection about this monopoly and whether in India we compared to US we can strictly control the monopoly, and what will happen is not capitalism. What will happen in some kind of not competitive spirit but monopoly. So that he is worried, and whether it is the timing, he says that India is known for high level of youth unemployment. So whether what will happen to the employment situation. So these are the issues that come to the mind, and maybe Ramesh and Velu can touch upon. I would now invite Dr. Velu Murugan to kindly speak, and then followed by Ramesh. Velu Murugan, I would request you. Dr. Velu Murugan has been with the Indian Economic Service and Tamil Nadu government. He has been one of the main thinker and thought leader in the Tamil Nadu government in economic policy making, and he has been trying to get investment into Tamil Nadu from world over. So he has been sort of studying all the country's economy, and until now he day-to-day basis he updates. So with these words, I would request Dr. Velu Murugan to give his thoughts.
Velu, you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Nirmal. Manas, I'm meeting you after a very long time.
Yeah.
I'm meeting you almost after 3.5 decades. Of course, I keep talking to Rajiv. Then I have met Manchanda in a couple of meetings. So I'm meeting you after a very long time. First of all, you have done a very nice summing up. You gave a broad snapshot of this complex asset monetization plan. Is definitely complex. Going through the 2 volumes published by Niti Aayog is definitely requires a lot of concentration, and it's a rigorous exercise. First of all, we have to understand the background of it. Let me touch up very briefly about the background. Honorable Prime Minister announced that India will have to become $5 trillion economy by 2025. There is a strong positive correlation between GDP growth and infrastructure development. I think the ratio is somewhere around 2.5. If I understand, the multiplier factor is about 2.5. So 1 unit of investment in infrastructure results in almost 2.5 times growth in GDP. This is what I read. Maybe I have to be corrected. It needs substantial investment in infrastructure. And so Niti Aayog brought out 2 more documents called National Infrastructure Pipeline. So we have 2 pipelines. One is National Asset Monetization Pipeline. Another is National Infrastructure Pipeline. So we have 2 pipeline projects announced by government, and detailed documents have been published by Niti Aayog. I went through both the documents. Well, National Infrastructure Pipeline talks about investment requirement of 111 lakh crores in the next 4 years. It's an incredible mammoth budget requirement, and is definitely it cannot be met out of conventional budget sources. Definitely not out of government budget. And if you look at the government budget, well, it's definitely in a it's in a very difficult position. Fiscal deficit has gone up to 9.4%. The central tax to GDP ratio is very stagnant, around 9 to 11%. We are one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the world. Our tax revenue is not increasing in percentage terms, and our government is heavily borrowing, and the government debt has gone up to 90% of the GDP, which is very, very high. It is definitely unsustainable. Given this fiscal position, I don't think we can any of this infrastructure projects planned in this national infrastructure pipeline can be taken up. And 111 lakh crores requirement in the next 4 years is definitely a very tall figure, very huge figure. So what are the options? So the government came up with this asset monetization planning by taking advantage of the brownfield projects which are already functioning, and they are already doing the revenue generation. So this raises some concerns. I thought about, to me, there are 12 concerns which I'll briefly sum up. You have already highlighted many of these concerns. Anyhow, I thought that I will add a few more concerns which are not mentioned. The question is why government is not opting for privatization of greenfield projects planned the National Infrastructure Pipeline project. There are so many projects which have been identified. Why not those projects be taken up with the private sector participation instead of opting for brownfield? Why not greenfield? Maybe that brownfield projects are more attractive because they are generating revenue from the day one. Whereas greenfield projects are very, very challenging. They have their own gestation period, a long approval process, and the revenue generation is not sure. Whereas brownfield projects, we already know what is the revenue the project is generating. So it is easy for the private sector and it will be very attractive for private sector. So brownfield projects are offered vis-a-vis greenfield projects. But this raises a lot of issues and concerns. Well, one of the concern is what will be the value fixation? Well, the value fixation, is it going to be, how is it going to be done? So we are talking about a lease period of 50 to 60 years. Even for an economist to assess the revenue potential in the 50 to 60 years is going to be very, very difficult. We are not talking about a medium term or even a 10-year or 15-year period. We are talking about 50 to 60-year lease period. And that is quite a long period, and it's almost 2 generations. And revenue estimation, what would be the revenue accrual during this period is going to be very difficult even for private sector, because these depend on so many exogenous factors. Many of the factors are beyond the control of government, beyond the control of private sector also. Obviously, the private sector would begin much lower value to be on the safer side. So would it be the correct value? So value fixation could be a serious challenge even for government. Then there are some projects, brownfield projects, which are making a lot of profits. There are many projects which are not making profits. They are loss making also. Will the private sector, obviously the private sector would pick up the profit making projects. What about loss making projects? Can they be also monetized? It's going to be very difficult. Private sector will not show interest in loss making projects. If you look at airports, some airports have huge revenue generation. Some airports, minor airports in smaller towns and cities, they are not profit making. What about them? So are we going to club and offer it as a bundle, or will will the private sectors choose, may be given the choice of selecting only the projects of their choice? In that case, they'll choose only profit making projects. What about loss making? Then what about the funding for this? Where will the private sector get money for this? Where are they going to get the money? Obviously, government expects revenue out of that 6 lakhs crores. And during the current fiscal year, the government has fixed a target of 88,000 crores. Where will the money come from? Obviously, private sector will have to borrow, raise finance from various sources, including FDI. But the most often sought route is the conventional banking, the commercial banks. Or the banks have to lend money. And if the projects fail, what will happen to the bank lending? Will they become NPA, non-performing assets? What is the implication for the common man? When the assets are monetized, what will happen to the common man? This is another major concern. Will the user charges be revised? You talked about the monopoly. It's a natural monopoly. When the monopoly position transfers from government to private sector, and the private sector obviously would like to fix the charges which is remunerative, is not going to subsidize it. Obviously, they look for making profits. And if they revise and make the user charges, if they increase the user charges, will it become a burden to the common man? The government will obviously subsidize. Many of the infrastructure services are subsidized, yes. But will the private sector will have the same perspective? Will they? What will they do? What will be the implication for the common man? Then what will the monetization? There is often a fear that the monetization will end up in privatization. Though it's only a lease, there is no transfer of ownership of assets. The fear is that the lease period is so long, it tantamounts to privatization. This is what the opposition leaders, some of them have raised this as an issue. Though it is not strictly privatization, it's only monetization, the lease period is quite long. So if you lease your house for 60 years, then obviously it's as good as you are selling the house. This is a fear that how does the government address this issue? This is a very sensitive issue. After all, these assets were built with the taxpayers' money. And assets built with the taxpayers' money, if they are transferred to private sector, how do you address a concern that it is not privatization and it is only monetization? The government will have to do a lot of talking, will have to do a lot of convincing on this. Then will the service deliverables will remain high? See, when the private sector takes over an infrastructure project, will the service which the common man get, infrastructure services, will the quality remain good? For instance, if the road is privatized and the private sector takes over, will they continue to adhere to the maintenance and provide high quality roads? What is the guarantee that they will do that? What is the guarantee they will maintain it properly? At the end of 60 years, will the assets come back to government in good condition? Will there be proper maintenance be done by private sector? Will the infrastructure services quality remain high? These are some of the issues that will come up. And most important is we don't have proper regulatory framework. For electricity, there is a tariff regulatory commission. For instance, electricity regulatory commission governs most of the things, including dispute settlement, contract enforcement, price fixation. So many issues are handled as far as the power projects are concerned. But we don't have such a regulatory commission for other infrastructure services. Unless these regulatory commissions are in place, it will create a lot of confusion. It will result in a lot of disputes and contractual, and we won't have proper dispute settlement mechanism also. So these things will have to be addressed if you have to make the monetization program a success. And there must be a concurrent monitoring and evaluation by government, by an independent organization. If the private sector failed to deliver, then what's the guarantee? The government should have the option to take back the assets and entrust it to somebody else. So there must be, instead of, after 60 years, if you do a post-mortem, is of no use. A post-mortem analysis doesn't help. So a concurrent evaluation and enforcement mechanism should be there to ensure that the private sector delivers actually. When he gets assets, he should also deliver. He is going to charge definitely, but there must be some service deliverables, certain standards, so that the common man gets a infrastructure service of a good quality, of a high quality. Then transparency and administrative mechanism to handle this. I have handled the private sector investments to a large extent and a few infrastructure projects also. Each infrastructure project is very unique. It has got its own unique problems, and we have covering about 12 diverse sector ministries, infrastructure projects falling in the domain of 12 diverse ministries, and each infrastructure project is very unique. Yeah, the method of handling it is unique. The problems that come up are unique. So, do we have the expertise and experience to handle that? You talked about the international experience. I read quite a lot about the international experience. Nirmal also talked about the railways, privatization, then nationalization, renationalization, particularly the signal services and are not been properly maintained. That the British railways had huge problem. Ultimately, they have to do the renationalization because the private sector didn't do a good job. They didn't invest properly in signaling. We have diverse experiences. In some countries, this asset monetization is a big success, no doubt. In some countries, it was a disaster. It depends on how you handle it, how you address the issues, and definitely this monetization will be needed. Given the current fiscal position for the government, it is definitely needed. But it has to be carefully done. It has to be carefully calibrated. The issues and the concerns have to be properly addressed. Otherwise, we'll end up with a huge confusion, disputes, court cases, and it will result in a big setback because once there is a setback for a private sector, it becomes very shy. It will not invest further. So we cannot afford to create that shyness, and we have to make it a success. To make it a success, we need to do it to proper homework. Address all these 12, 13 issues which I talked briefly, and if you address these issues, asset monetization can be a success. And the government definitely needs money. And if you have to achieve this target of $5 trillion economy, we need substantial investments in infrastructure. And we need to address these issues before we initiate the monetization. Otherwise, we end up with confusion. And I wanted to sum up these concerns, some of these concerns. You have already covered many of these concerns, and you have beautifully summed up, gave a good snapshot of this monetization program, and there is a big role for our officers to make it a success. I wish this program becomes a success. This asset monetization becomes a success. For that, the homework needed is quite huge. That agenda before government is very huge. Thank you very much, Manas. You did a good job. Nirmal, that is all I wanted to cover in my brief summing comments.
Thank you very much, Velu, for wonderful insights, and especially you have touched upon very, very important issues, especially the valuation issue. What is the actual worth of these assets? That is very, very important. Again, you raise the NPA issue. That is, they will take loan, and if they don't return, what happens? So I think you also raised that these brownfield projects that will be monetized, it will kind of give about rupees 6 trillion in 4 years' time, and current year it is 0.88 trillion rupees, 0.88 trillion, next year 1.62, and 23, 24, 1.80, and 24, 25, 1.67. You also mentioned that national infrastructure plan of 100 lakh crores, the 100 trillion rupees. But they also have given in this report a figure of 43 lakh crores, that is 43 trillion rupees, which basically this 6 trillion rupees or 6 lakh crores constitutes only 14%. So I think we need to be clear what is this 43 crore, because every year government is talking about 100 lakh crores infrastructure plan, and they have announced it 3 times already. And so maybe maybe there needs to be clarity. Other thing is very important in this respect, that in the road sector already we have done asset monetization, and the results so far has been mixed. And in terms of our privatization, also the result is mixed. And you raise the integrity issue, that you raise the transparency issue, and whenever such kind of privatization, or in this case, asset monetization, which is basically going to lease, is concerned, there is always fear that it may it may bring in transparency issues. So transparency will be a very important thing. With these words, I would request Ramesh to kindly come over. Ramesh has huge experience in the fiscal area, especially in the Department of Expenditure, and also in on the divestment issues. So kind of he is already exposed to the practical problems that it results in. So you will share with his experiences, which will be very helpful. And thank you so much, Velu, for your very insightful remarks. And of course, Dr. Bhattacharya covered these two huge documents in 30 minutes kind of presentation that is very creditable. With these words, I would request Ramesh to kindly come over.
Thank you, Nirmal. So, after this very comprehensive presentation by Manas, covering almost all the aspects very analytically and very critically, followed by Dr. Velmurugan, supplementing whatever little was left, and from his own experience, he has added so many things. Now, not much is left for me to say, but still, I will try to make 1 or 2 points. See, the beauty of this announcement of monetization program by the government is that they are not rigid. Government is not rigid, neither on the design system, nor on the implementation side. That is the beauty. What they are saying, that we are going for the monetization of these assets. Yes, that is the policy decision. How this will be done from the design angle and the implementation angle, we will see as we go along. Now, whether this will be done from using a triple P method or investment trust or concession agreement, there is no rigidity. Depending on the kind of the particular infrastructure which they are going to monetize, government is open, and that's very good. Now, as Velmurugan has stated, and that's a very important point, is that, see, whatever the issues are there, whatever the issues have been pointed out by the economists and others, these have come out in the media, and Dr. Manas has very comprehensively stated that and commented by Velmurugan also. See, these can be taken care. These are matters of detail. These are matters of detail, matters of implementation. A very honest and sincere attempt, if this is made, these problems are not unsurmountable. Not unsurmountable. We have Dr. Velmurugan sitting here, his valuable experience, and the people like him in the economic service and within the government of India from other services also. Here, the important thing is that the implementation, when you are going to implement these projects, monetize this has to be supported by the professional inputs. Committee of secretaries added by cabinet secretary is good, okay. But can you leave everything to this half a dozen secretaries or so? No. You have to have in this committee professionals, maybe like Morgan, he is retired from the level of secretary from Tamil Nadu government. Then you have within the central government also. You will have to identify these people and bring them in this committee or some kind of other overseeing committee. Not only this, there are various issues in the implementation, right pricing, right returns to the various stakeholders, the impact on the Aam Aadmi, etc., etc. As Morgan has very rightly pointed out, you will have to continue with a very effective concurrent monitoring and enforcement mechanism. And where from this mechanism will come? If you have only, say, journalists from the government in the committee, you have to have professional inputs at levels, design level, implementation level, monitoring level. At every level, the government will have to do that. The, the, the entire mindset and thinking will have to undergo a change. And I'm sure, an honest and a sincere effort can really bring a lot of success here. Already, road sectors, in the road sector, maybe, the results have been mixed in the electricity also. But on the whole, if you see, supposing you want to travel here from Delhi to somewhere in the north or somewhere in the south. So earlier, going from Delhi to Chandigarh, you used to take 7 hours and lot of blockages on the way. Now with very wide triple P road, you can just, continue at the rate of more than 100 kilometers. You pay something on the toll plaza, but more than that, you save even on the petrol also. You save time, you save petrol, you save all the parishani, on the way. So ultimately, we will have to come out of this mindset, government controlled, government implemented, government administered system. We will have to, forget this excuse of Aam Aadmi, at what cost they will get the benefit and all that. Now, you see, when we are talking about this, we should not forget the basic issue. The basic issue is, as Morgan has pointed out, but he has pointed out in terms of certain ratios to GDP. Revenue is coming down, the revenue is not enough, fiscal deficit growing and all that. In terms of fiscal deficit, it hides much more than it reveals, Now, I will give you some absolute figures. Last year, the government revenue was 15.55 lakh revenue receipts. And some non-debt capital receipts, selling of assets and non-tax revenue, etc. The total was 16.02 lakh. Now, against this, the total expenditure was 34.50 lakh crore. This bigger than lakh crore. Your total earnings are 16 lakh and you are spending more than 34 lakh crore rupees. Where are you heading for? Fiscal deficit 9%, it hides so many things. You are spending more than double your revenue. And still it hides so many things, Fiscal deficit last year, 18.49 lakh crore. If you have fiscal deficit, you borrow that amount. But are your total borrowings only this much? Only this much? No, these are much more than that. Much more than that. Because you are not able, you don't have money even to spend on the day-to-day expenditure of the government. the total expenditure which is here 34.50 lakh crore last year, or before that year 1920 it was 27 lakh crore something. You have to pay the principal amount also of the debt you have taken over the years. You don't have even a single rupee to pay that. What you do that additional borrowing. You do that borrowing over and above the borrowings for fiscal deficit, for meeting the money for fiscal deficit. Now, the end result is, I will give you just one example, how all this is totally unsustainable. And from here, starts, this concept of either outright sale of the assets, which the government have done by selling the PSUs or through monetization, etc. Now, interest payments alone last year constituted more than 43% of the total receipts of the government. Just interest payments only. Take away 43%. Now, this year, as per the budget estimates, interest payments are 41% of the total receipts of the government. Over the years, because you are borrowing, you are not able to pay, you borrow more, you are not able to spend, you borrow, you are not able to, your revenues are not sufficient to undertake the expenditure. For that also you borrow. It's accumulating over the years. And the position has reached to such an extent. Even if in the case of a private sector, the situation was even a fraction of this, we could have called this is going bankrupt. In the case of a sovereign government, you can't say like that because the government is sovereign, it can print money and all that. Now, this 41% of the total government receipts, revenue receipts, sale of assets and everything taken together. And then sale of assets also. 1.88 lakh crore is the provision for receipts from capital receipts, which include sale of assets also, monetization through monetization, etc., etc. Now, even after doing this, interest payments account for 41% of the total thing. Now, if this doesn't materialize, in all probability, instead of 1.8 lakh crore, you may get 1 lakh crore or something like that, less than that. So almost half of your money will go only and only into interest payments. So where is the option? The option for the government is to either sell that asset straight away or get money through this monetization program, etc., etc. But even 6 lakh crores spread over a period of 4 years, on an average 1.5 lakh crore per year is nothing. When we see the financial position of the government. Why should any government be apologetic or defensive in mobilizing resources through either monetization, taking appropriate safeguards, as we have discussed, as Dr. Manus has pointed out, as Dr. Velmorgan has pointed out, or straight away selling of the assets. Personally, I feel that now it's a political government. I am not a politician. Otherwise, I feel that whatever the assets, commercial assets are there with the government, and the government has been saying from the rooftop, it is not the job of the government to undertake commercial activities, should be sold straight away. BPCL they have been trying to sell, they have not been able to sell so far. Earlier, government used to sell guava juice also, orange juice also, and used to make bread also. They are out of this business. How long they will keep on selling petrol and diesel? And is it the job of the government to do such things? I think the time has come. Government should take bold decisions. Whatever, depending on the nature of the assets. Now, road you can't sell straight away. You can't sell. Railways you can't sell straight away, except you can say that you can run a train on the railroad which we have laid down. So, depending on the nature of the assets, government should take very bold decisions, go for outright sale or go for monetization of the assets. But all the time, all the time ensuring professional input at each and every stage, at the design stage, at the implementation stage, at the monitoring stage, at the enforcement stage, all stages, inputs of the professional should be there if we want to succeed. That's all. This much I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ramesh, for your for mentioning very important points and need for specialized input to take concrete decision, and also what our government have been saying. Successive governments, in fact, have been saying that government has no business to be in business in the sense, and also you expressed the very difficult and unsustainable fiscal situation for which drastic measures need to be taken. And what you were saying, almost similar voices were raised by Kaushik Basu when he says that it is better to go for outright sale than this one, because he raised, of course, many issues like monopoly and duopoly and capture and asset stripping, uh, fear of reaching a Russian kind of situation where oligopolistic control will may take place. Another thing he said is that maybe out of 6 trillion rupees or 6 lakh rupees, it may be over optimistic. What will land basically something like 3,000 billion rupees or 3 trillion rupees or 3 lakh crore kind of money. So this is the thing that what Kaushik Basu felt. But of course, fiscal situation is very disturbing, and it calls for very strong measures. And let us hope that these asset monetization program becomes successful with kind of uh, cautions and precautions and safety measures. With these words, I would request Dr. Sharat Kumar to kindly share his thoughts with us. Thank you, Dr. Sharat Kumar.
Thank you, Nirmal. So I must congratulate Manas for having surmised the two reports of the Niti Aayog very well. But I must also add my personal reservations, because I felt that the second volume was more or less a repetition of the first volume. And I also feel that perhaps there is a lot of inadequacy as far as the understanding the whole issue is concerned. And I don't know where to begin from, but let me say that, well, it's not that, well, investment was not being made earlier. You see, the magnitude of investment, let us suppose we take the figures of 2019-20, which was a more normal year compared to 2020-21 and subsequently. You see, the level of investment in infrastructure was somewhere around 4%. Now, some kind of experts who came together, they said that, well, India needs to invest 7% of its GDP every year as far as infrastructure development is concerned. Now, with the country's GDP being around 200 lakh crores, that is for the year 2019-20. I'm not taking 20 and 21. That was a normal year, which have still not reached. So if 7% will work out to 14 lakh crores. And that particular paper, I'm forgetting to, maybe that it is of the National Infrastructure Pipeline that mentions it. So out of that 14 lakh also, what they envisage is that 8 lakh crore, that means 60% will come from the private sector and 40% will come from the public sector. Now, you see, so 8 lakh crores is expected from the private sector, and 6 lakh crore from the public sector. Now, when we talk about the 6 lakh crores, somehow I find the government is, you see, good at creating a hype. It will not give you the figure for 1 year, 5 years is summed up, a 10-year figure is summed up. So, well, there is a problem of, you see, sufficient information with the experts so that, well, there can be an informed debate. There is a problem. Anyhow, so if you let us suppose divide this 6 lakh crores per year, it works out to 1.5 lakh crores. Now, against this requirement of, let us suppose, you see, 14 lakh crores, we are talking about 1.5 lakh crores. But I must certainly say that the government is also admitting that it is also, you see, giving support to railways and other sectors. So, you see, there is already being provided a good sum besides this, but this particular thing is also being attempted. Now, what is the problem? The problem is, you see, what they are talking about this uh, pipeline, see, monetization of assets. This monetization of assets, so the three concepts: privatization, monetization, and then there is a third issue, securitization. Now, the particular, you see, report which is there in the by the Niti Aayog, it does not talk about securitization at all. Whereas, you see, now since Nirmal has been in the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank brought out a very good report, namely national. No, they brought out a you see a particular paper. If I may just yes, they brought out a very good paper called Securitization Alternative Funding Source. Now, this is the issue. So, there is a mixing up of the concepts, monetization and securitization. The simple concept of monetization would be, let us suppose I am owning a particular building, and what I decide I monetize, that means I sell it off. And instead of being an owner, I become a tenant of the new buyer. That will be monetization. Now, when these people are talking about, they are raising two issues actually. One is public-private partnership, the other is securitization. Now, if they had talked on those terms, perhaps things would have been clear. Now, let us see as far as their investment structure is concerned or the expected funds flow is concerned. They are talking that, well, as far as the different infrastructure, let us suppose railways are there, then they have identified transportation, and in transportation also you talk about different things, etc., etc. Then telecommunication. Then you see, now we don't recognize, but one of the very important infrastructure today is satellites. Now, satellites also in the public sector. Now, what is happening is that you see, as far as public-private partnership is concerned, it used to be there earlier also. In fact, this particular thing started at the time of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and we were representing Planning Commission in that particular special group. Subsequently, well, Dr. Manpreet Singh Ahluwalia took it in a very big way in the Planning Commission. The whole floor was dedicated to public-private partnership, and they did succeed in that. So, as far as what they are talking about the road sector is concerned, where 1.5 lakh crores in 4 years they are expecting, and if they are talking about the railways, again when they are talking about this 4 years period, this is public-private partnership. Now, that's perfectly all right. Now, it is not kind of a selling assets, etc., etc., etc. Public-private partnership is a concept where the government, you see, authorizes somebody to use its assets. As simple as that. So it is a kind of a lease. And you see, people may be doubtful, well, if it is a 10 years or 20 years. Now look at what happened in the Delhi Metro. In Delhi Metro, when we were doing the exercise in the Planning Commission, let us suppose we expected that the flow of passengers would be 2x. But today it is 10x. So you see, it's not a question of, you see, flow of funds. Similarly, many of the toll roads you will find that recovery was expected in 10 years, but they recovered in 5 years. So there are, you see, areas where the returns are very high. So that there's not a problem. You go for public-private partnership. But why are you confusing with this particular thing, monetization of assets? Call it public-private partnership. Now I will now draw you another line. Another segment is securitization. What does it mean? Now let us suppose we have MTNL and we have Power Grid Corporation. Today also in this particular document, they are mentioning about the using the towers of the MTNL everywhere and using the towers of the Power Grid Corporation. And where do they want to use it? It is already earning remunerative. In fact, this particular thing could have been left to these public sector enterprises. There's no business for the government to be unnecessarily coming in the picture. And they were already doing it. So what happens? Now they know that these towers have become attractive from the point of view of telecommunication to all those, mobile telephone companies. They are willing to undertake, instead of setting up their own towers, they can use these towers. So these towers have become useful. There is a ready flow of money every year. If they just lease it out, let us suppose they get 100 crores. Now, so what they intend to do is that these particular assets, which have a regular flow, not the dead assets, these are the useful assets, and these have been created by the public sector. Instead of recognizing and complementing them, they are talking all the time of privatization and monetization, never patting the backs of the public sector, which is very unfortunate. Now, what happens? These public sector enterprise or whosoever, it can be a private sector also, they realize that these particular assets are creating a regular flow of income. So what they do is that they create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, and that these whole assets are transferred to this. But in many cases, these SPVs are a subsidiary of the main CPSE, Central Public Sector Enterprise. Now, these SPVs, whatever assets they have, they will securitize. And in fact, then because these are giving you returns either by way of, let us suppose, profits or interest. So they can go to the stock exchange by way of bonds or by way of stocks. They can sell to the investors. Okay, so now in here also what the government has done is that, one, they are saying that, well, they can have an SPV model, and because there is a assured returns already, investment would be attracted. And you can have all kinds of investors. You can have foreign portfolio investments, you can have pension funds, etc., retail investors also. So now what happens is that they will list, this particular SPV would be listed on the stock exchange, and then because they can easily evaluate the assets, they can go to the stock exchange and raise this fund. Now, why is this requirement? What has happened is because this infrastructure funding is the problem. What was happening so far, the funding of infrastructure projects was being done by the banks. Now the banks, they raise short-term funds, and now here the requirements of infrastructure is long-term, funds. So there was a mismatch. So they constituted this infrastructure leasing finance corporation. There was a problem, because the problem perhaps was temporary because the economy was not doing well. But it's not that well you would have. So I don't know. That is a different exercise altogether. But this is certainly a thing to be discussed along with it. So this is the issue that, well, how do you find finance? Now, besides this particular important issue of mentioning securitization, when you talk about securitizing these assets, it becomes very simple and acceptable to everybody. So why are they talking about monetization, privatization? This is not called for. This is creating huge confusion. It's a simple exercise. And then, well, as far as government funding is concerned, it's not so problematic. Now, as Belu Morgan was also talking, we have to, you see, keep in picture the rate of growth in the economy. So if you can manage, if you can carry everybody together, then what happens? Your rate of growth is high in the subsequent years. 1% rate increase in GDP will give you somewhere at 25,000 crores to 30,000 crores. So you should focus how will you really raise your growth. Naturally, it depends very much on investment. Now, let us suppose people have been also talking highly of the private sector, highly of the foreign direct investment. What has happened as you discussed the foreign direct investment in India? The whatever investment in the last few years has come, it has gone in the real sector. Now, real estate sector is not your infrastructure sector. So, but at the same time, what do we see at the stock exchanges? Which is the flow of funds by the whole country, because you have savings with the people also. It's not only the capitalists are having the money. The whole there is a paradigm shift. Large amount of savings is coming from the household sector. Now, the savings have gone up today. The situation is the savings is more than the investment, because the investment climate is not conducive. You had a very important vehicle in this country, namely the public sector enterprises. You could have made the best use of them. Instead of encouraging them, you have demoralized them. You are talking about private sector. I mean, so there is a certain kind of a bias towards the private sector with this government. I mean, naturally people may not like this, but this is what I fear. But what is the simple thing to do is, well, you go for the mixed economy approach. Even China, which is a success story, is a mixed economy. And they have made use of both the private sector and the public sector. And public sector, out of 500, you see, Fortune 500 companies, 102 companies are from USA. And 110 companies are public sector enterprises of China. Now, why have you forgotten our public sector enterprises? What kind of world we are living in? What kind of, patriotism we have? You see, it's a typical kind. And now, not only that, for instance, Ramesh mentioned about this Bharat Petroleum Corporation. Now, this is being taken by Vedanta, and if you look at the rate of return of this company is less than the public sector. A less efficient company is taking a more efficient company. What kind of logic? The whole world is laughing at us. I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharad, for raising such an important issue of the need to keep our public sector healthy, and whatever assets we have in the public sector, to use those assets, and those profit makings undertakings within the public sector. If we give away those and they cause more of a problem, and economy goes haywire, and there is capture happens, oligopoly happens, monopoly happens, what will be the situation? I was reminded of what Chief Economic Advisor said in his interview. They said that these are very fractional percentage of the work being done. These are only low-hanging fruits, so we can go for more and more. So this is just a picture abhi to baki hai. So if that be so, one needs to be mindful, especially in terms of valuation, in terms of employment, in terms of quality of service, in terms of NPAs. All these safeguards need to be maintained, and whether these things can be really, already those enterprises can be made sustainable, public sector enterprises. Some of them may have viability, and securitization issue that Sharat mentioned. So we are coming to the end of today's discussion. I would like Manas to really conclude by by mentioning if anything he needs to sort of add or supplement. Thank you.
Oh, we are not able to listen.
I think it's an extremely useful and valuable dialogue, and for the economists outside government, they should also learn from what we are saying. And I agree with Sharad that this volume 2 and volume 1, they leave a lot of gaps. That is why I have also mentioned in my paper in summary that they should really come out more explicitly. Now, Sharad has objection against the usage of the term monetization, because there are various subcomponents like PPP and others. Then why do you really call it monetization? I don't know why it is called monetization. It might, perhaps this is called everywhere monetization, securitization, and other things are maybe also in that broader class. I don't know, but these things. But one thing, this very broadly, very boldly, one thing has come out. Like Velu says, the feasibility. Sharad also has said about feasibility. What is the basis of these and how it can go here? And can we really, slump eventually? We cannot save the faces if it doesn't promise. But when you look at it from what Ramesh has said, the deep problem in on the fiscal side, government has to some or other promote, but that doesn't mean at any cost. It has to be backed by solid research, and concerns raised by Velu and Sharad, these have to be independently addressed properly. Like Sharad said, is it necessary to privatize? If the return is higher in public sector, why should it go private? And if private sector doesn't, give you, but the issue is the counterfactual is not known in all these cases. The problem is that even when the private investment privatization started, because India has now traversed some ways in privatization and all that, even monetization of assets. No one knows really, no one can understand, but it doesn't mean that everything is unknown. That is why what Ramesh says, that you have to have technical person. We look into the assumptions. Niti Aayog, Sharad, I also mentioned that that Infrastructure Leasing and Finance Corporation was also consulted by Niti Aayog. They played a key role in developing these estimates and all that. So what is needed is basically either we don't know anything, so go by our impulse, or we don't do anything. In between, some ways have to be found out. And as Ramesh says, that the flexibility in the entire design offers us a lot of scope and provision for technical input as we go ahead. We cannot completely rule out privatization, whether this is a compulsion or not, because sometimes privatization really is much better rather than the government monetization, the government operation. And that we have seen. Government doesn't maintain, government doesn't maintain a lot, because of rules, regulations, establishment specificities, and many other things. Really, consumers have, of course, these are natural monopolies, so people have to go by train in whatever means possible, and government will somehow or other run the train services, whatever will be the level of efficiency. But then the issue is that efficiency level has to be really compared. It's very difficult to know what will happen if it is given to private sector. That is why I still agree that there has to be leasing rather than foregoing the rights completely for the private sector. Because the flexibility which Ramesh says, it offers us some opportunity to come back, But then the issue is the kind of governance capabilities that we need in coming back expeditiously and rejuvenating the whole thing in a different pathway. It is yet to develop. It has not, and I agree fully with Ramesh that if you really go by all executive fellows coming here, and technical fellows do not have time to really go into examine each and every assumption, starting from the questions which Velu has raised and Sharad has raised, like should we really go for privatization? Isn't public sector they're doing well? Number two is are the assumptions reasonable? Can government really expect this to happen in course of time? May not be. And if it doesn't happen, then what government does? So if not, how, why, these questions can be asked at each and every stage of calculation of the project. And technical people, except technical people, nobody can really answer. If we hurry, we really don't. I mean, definitely there's something called learning by doing, and in many of our projects, the people are going for litigation and their price is being revised and things like that. The experience is mixed. But then overall, are we better off in both fiscally and also in terms of consumer surplus and producer surplus? So are we Pareto better, going back to our basic economics, Pareto optimality, are we Pareto better in doing that? This is a big question that needs to be addressed. And definitely I agree with Charot that the volume 2 has to give us much more information, much more consistent information for our economists, government economists to really examine each and every proposal, keeping these concerns and questions which we have raised today, you know. And because there is concept of shadow price, I mean, what Ramesh is saying about the fiscal crisis. So if we don't go, if we don't get this money, I mean, if we don't get this money, maybe less, are we still better off than doing from government cover? These questions have to be asked. Maybe we are getting much less than what we are expecting. Maybe we are not happy. But coming back to Ramesh, given the fiscal situation, what is the option left? Can we come back to government and spend from government money? Given that infrastructure project spending and GDP has a strong multiplier effect, and multiplier effect also means employment. You know, so considering all these, I think in today's discussion we have lot of inputs, valuable, rich inputs for the young people, for which Nirmal is talking about, the young economists to really look into and do work on that. Our service officers. Thank you, Nirmal. So I'm over.
Thank you very much, Manas, for your very, very important observation, and diverse ideas and comments have come, and that will help us. And there has to, so the conclusion that emerge is that many of the cautions and safety measures and care have to be taken in the process of this asset kind of a monetization plan. So we have to be very careful. So one, and there, on the issue of clarity, because the report says that it can mean accrual, it may mean private sector investment. So there, comes a very flimsy and very kind of undefined. So if it is private investment, how much of it? What is the valuation of it? So all those transparency issues and those governance issues. So apart from all those social and other safety issues, the governance issues is very important. So with these words, I think we can conclude today's program, that while pursuing further and while kind of proceeding further, all the cautions and the care need to be taken. And if it is to be extended to other areas, because now it is a very limited area, more and more areas it looks like that government want to cover, and success, if we build success stories on that, one can have clarity. Many of the things are not so clear, but I think what Ramesh said about the difficult fiscal situation, so some drastic measures need to be taken, and the government and the nation is proceeding towards that, but it has to proceed with caution, care, and I think some parting thoughts is to be given by Ramesh. So Ramesh, you can speak a few sentences.
Just one point I would like to make. See, on the basis of discussions here, now we all agree that to be very honest and sincere in its design and implementation, it requires very high level of technical inputs. Now, straight away, I will recommend that this committee of secretaries, we know how much time cabinet secretary will have, how much time other secretaries will have in designing or even monitoring this the entire program. Straight away, I would recommend that this committee should have as members one officer from the Indian Economic Service and one from a finance and account service also straight away as members, and given a fixed tenure of 2-3 years so that some continuity can be maintained. Even if the person crosses the age of superannuation, 2-3 years of continuity in this, 2 more members should be added, one from the economic service and one from the finance and account service of this level. That much I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very good. So we conclude today's discussion, and we can have 3-4 minutes of informal session after I end recording, so we can exchange some informal ideas. So I will now end the recording.